Thanks for tuning in to My Valley, His Victory, hosted by me, Mackenzie Smith, where I interview Christians who love the outdoors and have walked through valleys in their lives. In a world of highlight reels and surface-level relationships, we all have faced hardships. I believe our experiences can be encouraging to others if we have the courage to be vulnerable. 2 Corinthians 1 says, "The Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." My goal is to inspire you to come to the Creator through His creation and connect you with Christians who have been through similar experiences. I pray that this podcast encourages you if you are in a valley and pushes you to share how God has turned your past valley into His victory. If you enjoy these episodes, please take a moment to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform and follow this podcast on Instagram. If these episodes have been impactful for you, or you know someone that would benefit from one of these episodes, please feel free to share it with a friend. Your support means the world to me. Thanks so much for being here. On today's episode of My Valley, His Victory, we have Brad Sasser. Brad, also known as Shep on the trail, Sasser and his wife Michelle, also known as No Miles, have been in the outdoor ministry since 2019. Brad previously served as a pastor and a youth pastor in South Alabama. He founded Trail Servants and Shep's Place, a nonprofit hostel located in Shady Valley, Tennessee, just south of Damascus, Virginia. He is a full-time trail chaplain serving primarily the Florida and Appalachian Trail. He and Michelle have been married for 20 years and have 2 children, Lane and Meredith. Thanks so much for being with us today, Brad.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know I just read your bio, but why don't you go ahead and just share a little bit more about who you are?
Yeah, well, my name is Brad Shep Sasser, and I am a trail chaplain. So we serve and bless hikers primarily on the East Coast along the Florida Trail in the winter, and then the Appalachian Trail, the NOBO northbound and SOBO southbound seasons. We are trail angels. We do a lot of work. We shuttle people if they're sick or hurt or something like that. We shuttle dogs to vets and people to urgent cares, and we set up trail magic, and we do whatever we can to serve and bless hikers. But we also enjoy getting out and seeing other parts of the country. So who knows, where you might bump into us at. But
yeah. So for those listening who may not know what trail magic is, tell us what that is.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, we call it trail blessing sometimes as well. And that's just where someone goes and sets up maybe at a road crossing, and they'll have, like we'll grill out. We'll have like hamburgers, hot dogs. We did tacos up in Pennsylvania recently, and we'll have fresh fruit and things that hikers don't get to carry, luxury things maybe that they don't get to carry, like fruit, avocados, and different things like that. And then we'll have, different kind of drinks. I like to do fun drinks like yoo-hoos or peach knee-highs and things like that you just don't come across a lot on the trail. So it's just a way to really make a hiker's day. I mean, anyone that's been hiking for any length of time, what it is to come around the corner and to smell a grill and to see those tents set up or something. And, sometimes we've had people come out of the woods and just cry when they see the setup, because they're so excited to not eat ramen and tuna for the night. They're gonna get to save the ramen and tuna, and they can have a hamburger or a taco and get fresh fruit, or ice cream. Sometimes we have popsicles and things like that. So it's just a way to bless the hiking community and to show them the love that we have in us, we show to others.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's so cool that I always love a good trail angel, and just love whenever people get out there and get involved, even if they can't hike those long trails, right? Like, I think it's so cool that people go out and get involved in that process in some way or another.
Yeah.
And so I know in your bio, you talked about being a pastor before, and then, kind of made this change into being a trail chaplain. Talk to us a little bit about how being a trail chaplain came to be, because like I said, when we talked the first time, like, I didn't even know that this was a thing.
Yeah.
And so kind of talk to us about how this even became an opportunity for you.
13 years ago, when I was a youth pastor, I walked across the state of Alabama with another guy, and we were raising money for Speed the Light, which is an organization that gives, vehicles and different things to missionaries. So we were raising money for charity for Speed the Light. We walked across the state of Alabama, and that was really my first time walking, hiking, having a backpack. And at the end of it, I was like, man, I really enjoyed this, even though it was a little miserable and stuff. At the end, I felt so fulfilled in the walk, and I met so many cool people. I was like, I enjoy this long distance hiking thing. So I Googled long distance hiking, and the Appalachian Trail popped up. I'd never really heard much about the Appalachian Trail before that. And so when I was a pastor, and I'll share some more of this a little later, I think, of when I was a pastor and I was a bivocational pastor, I was an accountant, just to get out of the stress of that. I started to section hike on the Appalachian Trail. And so that's what kind of took me into the hiking community, was that hike across Alabama, and then combined with just wanting to get outdoors and kind of clear my mind a little bit. And so I would always see people whenever I was on my section hikes. I would come back home and I would tell my wife, I've met the most, you know, interesting, beautiful, humble, hurting sometimes people out there on the trail. And I'd tell my wife, I was like, we need somebody, like we need a minister. We need somebody to just reach out and share love with these people on the trail. And I started to pray about that. Like, God, we need somebody out there, send somebody out there. And I didn't really expect that to be me. I wasn't my plan in the beginning. I was kind of just praying about that. And then ultimately I started to feel like, okay, look, this is why this is on your heart, because this is your call. This is your mission. And so, yeah, I sent our missions agency an email, and there was no trail chaplains. I just sent them an email and said, hey, I have this idea. And so they got up with me. They're like, we like this idea. So we essentially, there's a few trail chaplains out there with other groups and stuff, but like my specific group didn't have a trail chaplain at the time. But it is a small group of people.
Yeah. Like I said, whenever we first connected about it, I was like, I didn't even know that this was a thing, but this is so cool. Like, you get to be involved in the hiking community and you get to do ministry. And yeah, I just, obviously that's where my heart is with this podcast.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's just really cool that you're out there on trail, with some of these people. So obviously outdoor recreation for you seems like it's a lot of backpacking.
Yeah.
Have you completely through hiked the AT? Kind of talk to us about your history as a backpacker.
Yeah, no, I haven't completely through hiked the AT. I still lack some of the Northeast, and I tell people I'm an ADD hiker, like type hiker. It's like I'm so scattered. There's so many things I want to do, so many places I want to see, and things I want to enjoy. So I've hiked like parts of the Florida Trail, parts of the Arizona Trail, parts of the Oregon Coast Trail. But the AT, I like. I haven't been past Delaware Water Gap in Pennsylvania, so New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, part of Massachusetts, and then the last part of Maine. Like, I'm just saving that. I love Maine, but I don't want to finish. I want that to be the last, so I just haven't done Maine. But I've hiked a lot. Anything that's south of the Smokies, I've just been back and forth through. And then Tennessee, which is where we are right now, I've hiked that section, Tennessee and Southwest Virginia. Just, I could do it in my sleep, I think. So I've got, hundreds of miles back and forth. I've probably got over 2,000 miles, 2,200 miles total on the AT, but I have not. I could probably get the 2,000 mile patch for the 2,000 miles walk, but I don't have the whole thing done. But yeah, it's beautiful. Backpacking is a lot of what I do. But I like all forms of outdoor recreation. If I can get in a canoe and paddle, if I can get in a river raft and raft, going out and climbing, trying to learn to climb, do a little alpine climbing type stuff, mountaineering. I just love being outdoors in God's creation.
Yeah. So kind of rolling with that, talk to us about how Christ plays a role in all of this outdoor recreation.
Yeah, well, I love the verse Romans 1:20, and it's where, it talks about that we see God in nature, in creation, and when you look around and you see that, you're without excuse. I think that obviously when we look around at the beauty around us, it's really easy for me to say that to see there's a creator's hand in all of this. And sometimes people ask me, they'll say, Shep, where's your church? And I'm like, well, you're standing in it. Look around and there's a waterfall and these trees. And I was like, I have the most beautiful chapel in the world, is where I minister. they'll say, well, who's your congregation? And it's like, you are, these are my people. But yeah, you see God in nature. And I think that what happens when we go into the mountains or when we're in nature, not even doesn't have to be mountains. You can feel it at the beach too. People go on vacation or and stuff to these places, they slow down. And I feel like we run our life at way too fast a pace, though. The pace of life that we live in our society today is not a pace that we were meant to run at. Like my car will do 140 miles an hour, but if I run 140 miles an hour every day, that car is going to blow up. It's not meant to run that fast every day. And I think there's so much like we have so much like depression and anxiety and just so many things in our culture and society. And I know some of that stuff is a medical thing, but some of that stuff I think is induced by the pace that we run at. And we just have so many things going on. And when you get outside, when you get on a hiking trail, it's like the pace slows. When you're on a mountain, the pace slows. You don't have a ton of things to think about. You're thinking about the next step, the next hill. You're thinking about that water that you can't wait to get to put your feet in. You're thinking about taking a break with your friends and enjoying a conversation. It's just a slower pace of life. And I really feel like that rhythm is the rhythm of life that we were intended to have, and not this fast pace that, when we're out there. I mean, I know that people, we have to work and have jobs, but it's like we leave work and then we go to our kids' ball practice, and then we go to the kids' soccer practice, and then we gotta get home, we gotta cook dinner, we gotta do this. We run, we run, we run.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that that's so good. I think that it's so true. And, in society, all we look for is more. How can we get busier? How can we, do another thing? And I think you nailed it right on the head. Like, this is just not how we were designed. Sure, we can do it for a short amount of time, but at some point, it's like you said, like we weren't designed to run at that speed. So can you share with us how you got your trail name, Shep, and what that means, where it came from?
Shep was not my original trail name that I hiked with. My original trail name was an old nickname. And when I was going to go out and do trail ministry, I had a friend. It was an older gentleman, and he had hiked about 1,800 miles on the AT. And he was talking with me, and he's a pastor. And he was like, well, you probably need to have a trail name that's something to do with your call, and maybe not let someone like give you some crazy trail name, that just doesn't work. And so he suggested, he's like, well, we will call you Shepherd, but the hikers shortened it to Shep. So it's kind of like hiker given anyway. There's a lot of shepherds out there. I've known 2 or 3 different shepherds, so I've never known another Shep. So it really works out well. But yeah, it was a pastor friend that had hiked about 1,800 miles of the AT that suggested, like, you need to go ahead and just like get some kind of a name for yourself that like gives people an idea of what you do. But yeah, then the hikers shortened it to Shep, so that worked out really well.
So what was your original trail name?
Was Flunky.
Flunky.
Yes, yeah, that was my original trail name. So if you see trail registers from like 20, if there were trail registers, which they discard them, but trail registers from like 16, 17, it would say like Flunky. It wouldn't say Shep.
That's funny. And your wife does not hike? Is that why her name is No Miles?
She hikes. She's probably got, I don't know, 150 miles or more. She hikes some, but she's like a fair weather day hiker is how she describes herself. She really likes beautiful things. She likes the ponies in Grayson Highlands, the waterfalls, and she just doesn't do a lot of like long distance. She's not going to be out there for a week. She prefers to stay closer to like a bathhouse or something. So she has migraines sometimes when she kind of overexerts herself, and that's kind of a hindrance a little bit. You never know when one of those is going to pop up on her. So yeah, she just does a lot of support work with the hiking community with what we do. But yeah, so in 2019 at Trail Days, people kept asking her, they're like, how many miles have you walked with Shep? And she would say no miles, and she said no miles like 2 or 3 times, and they were like, oh, that's what we're going to call you. So
that's cute. I love it. So can you share a story with us about a way in which God has maybe revealed himself to you or spoken to you through being outdoors and recreating outdoors?
Yeah, that's a great question. If I just think about several things that where the Lord has just made a way for people when we've been praying about different things like my buddy Boxcar that needed a job, and we were at a hiker hostel in 2020, and Boxcar really needed a job, and I introduced myself and I told him I was like, I'm a trail chaplain. I want to pray and believe with you for a job. It's 2020. It's the middle of COVID. Boxcar's a chef by trade, and he lives in a van. He's living in his van. He's a hiker. He's hiked a lot, but he's really doing kind of the van life thing. There's a lot of people that just kind of live in vans or and kind of do the outdoors thing. They're hiking trails. But anyway, so Boxcar was like, it's the middle of COVID, and all the restaurants are shut down. So we're going to pray for him to get a chef job in the middle of COVID. That's not going to happen probably, but I was like, yeah, let's pray about it. Let's see what happens. I asked him, I was like, how much money do you need? And he's like, well, I live in the van with my dog. I really need a place for my dog to stay too. People frown on the animals being in the van. That's his home. And I was like, God will hook it up. God can work that out. We believe, for whatever. So we prayed, and I went back to my tent, and I was like, God, I kind of just wrote this check on you, and I need you to cash this check, And a couple of days later, Boxcar calls me up, and he's like, you're not going to believe this yet, but he said the marina up here is about to open back up, and they have this restaurant, and they've hired me to be their head chef. I'm going to get, more hours than I need, the money that I need. And they have a cabin with power, water, cable. The dog can stay there. We can stay there for free. They're going to put us up. And that really was a huge thing and part of Boxcar's story towards becoming a Christian and stuff and really living for the Lord. And he doesn't mind me telling this story. He's told me, I have permission to tell it or whatever. But yeah, God just moved in that situation, got him a job. And so there's just been several instances where, there's been needs, and you pray for needs, and just, I'm a big proponent of, let's see what God will do. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're going to pray about it. We're going to see what God will do. And I've just seen a couple times where it's just the Lord has moved, and there's no other way but that was God.
Yeah, I think that's so beautiful. And I love just that you went alongside someone and asked them, like, how can I be praying for you? Like, what do you need? You asked them very specifically so that you could pray very specifically also. I think, so often, and it's not necessarily wrong, but I think the more that we can pray specifically, the better. Like, if we're just like, oh God, can you do this thing? Point blank the end, you spend maybe 5 seconds praying for it. Not to say that that's not going to be an answered prayer, but I think the more we go to the Lord very specifically and in depth, like, I don't know, I see him move way more in those times where it's actually a very well thought out thing. It's, I'm praying very specifically, because sometimes God can answer your prayers, but you just said, hey, God, I need you to do this thing. And it's like, well, he did that thing, but maybe it's in a way that you didn't think about when you prayed as being an answered prayer. And so the more specific you can pray, the more you can see like, oh no, God answered here, here, and here, instead of maybe looking at it as an unanswered prayer when really he did answer your generic prayer in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Or you bounce between, you live in Alabama right now, right?
Yeah, South Alabama. Yeah, we're in Shady Valley, Tennessee, a big part of the year, and then we're back and forth to kind of South Alabama. Yeah.
Okay, so for somebody who's listening who maybe lives where you do in South Alabama, or in a place that's really not super well known for hiking and the outdoors that we've been talking about here, what are some ways that they can start connecting to God through the outdoors without maybe even having to leave their state?
Yeah. Well, I think there are outdoor recreation areas, all over the place, and smaller, like right here in Ozark, Alabama, for instance, where I am right now. There's a lake, and it has a walking trail that's about a 5K, 3.4 miles, a little longer than 5K, I think, to go around the lake. And it's really beautiful, and it's shaded, and it's nice to get out and do those things. So I think that, there's areas, no matter where you are, even in an urban area, there are parks and places for people to get out and be able to just spend some time, maybe sitting under a tree, spend some time reading, sitting outside by a lake. So you can get outside, and I have a buddy that says you get outside and let God touch your inside. That's the whole goal of what you do. And so you can do that. I mean, even in an urban area, if you have a garden or something outside that you can just go and sit in your garden and enjoy that time, that space. So you just have to find those spaces that are the spaces where you really feel like a connection with God. And there's a lot of those spaces even in cities and towns and things like that, or more urban areas. South Alabama, it's not that it's that urban. There's a lot of rural areas, but there's not a lot of recreation areas. But you can still find those places.
Yeah, for sure. Just might be a little bit different than what you want, but you can still get out there.
Yeah, it might not be quite as wild, but and I struggle with that too. Like when I'm here, I have to find those places to get out and just kind of get myself out into a place where I can enjoy and spend some time, praying and walking and just enjoying nature.
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit into the title of this podcast, My Valley, His Victory, would love for you to share a season of wilderness or valley that you experienced and just what God maybe taught you or prepared you for in that season.
Well, this is kind of an easy question for me in some ways because my wife, she has this joke where we've been married almost 20 years, and she has this joke that we've been married 20 years, 15 happy, or 16 happy coming up or whatever. And everybody's like, oh, what about those 4 or 5 years? And I know when those 4 or 5 years were. It was the time when I was a bivocational accountant. I was pastoring a church, and I preached, twice on Sundays, once on Wednesday night. And I was working like 50, sometimes 60 hours a week, going back to the running at a pace that we probably shouldn't be running at. I was like running at a super fast pace. I had one of the ladies from church call my house one night, and she said, I just want to hear my pastor's voice. I haven't heard his voice this week. And my wife says, well, we'd love to hear his voice too. We haven't heard his voice this week either. Because I was like leaving for work before my wife and kids woke up. I was coming home after my wife and kids were in bed. And it was just a really tough season in my life. I was doing the things I had to do to be faithful in ministry and to support my family, but I was just operating on burnout. Really didn't have much Sabbath. I was struggling just really hard. And so, yeah, that's a season I think I went through for a few years. And I look back on it now. It helps me now. If I have a hard day now, I mean, I'll think back and I'm like, well, I'm not in the cubicle, working 60 hours a week and then trying to do ministry. And God's brought me a long way. He's given me a wonderful calling. I have a lot of opportunities. And it's just a different life. And so definitely there was a time of struggle for 3 or 4 years there.
Yeah. So kind of talk to us a little bit about what God did with that season and just what he, maybe taught you or prepared you for.
Yeah. Well, I think he taught me to really just lean into him, right? We're going to go through seasons in life where we really, there's going to be struggles. I mean, there's going to be valleys, there's going to be struggles, there's going to be seasons where it's going to be hard. But God is God, no matter what season that we're in. He's still faithful and gracious, no matter what season that we're in. And I tell people all the time, He gives us grace to go through the seasons of life that we're in. Right, like right now, I don't feel tired at all. I was telling someone my schedule the other day, and I was talking about, I'm going to jump on a plane, going to go out west. And I was just going through my schedule, and they're like, do you ever get tired? And I said, no, I don't get tired. I love what I do. But I feel like I remember when I was a youth pastor, we were just constantly going and doing stuff every night and working with youth. And I look back now, and it wears me out to think about that time when I was a youth pastor. But I was like, in that moment, I was never tired, and I was wide open because God gave me grace to go through that, right? And it's the same thing even in those tough seasons. That season when I was bivocational and I was really just struggling, even in that season, there was still the grace that God gave me to make it through that time. And I mean, there was some days when I was difficult to live with. Probably my wife would tell you. I think she told me to go pray a lot of times during that time period, but really learning to lean into God. I love the scripture in Isaiah the scripture in Isaiah, they that wait upon the Lord, he will renew their strength. They will mount up on wings as eagles, run and not grow weary, walk and not faint. There was a times when we go through some things, weary times, and God just helps us through those times when we lean into him. And so that's my biggest takeaway, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, and for, sharing. I think that, I'll just say thank you for sharing that, marriage can be hard. And I love the answer that your wife gives, 20 years married, but 15 happy. I think that
I told her, I was like, you gotta quit telling people that joke. They don't understand the whole context of it. They're thinking I was just a horrible person for like 4 or 5 years. But yeah.
But I think that, a lot of couples go through a season of that in some way or another, whether it's, job related or some, there's many reasons why that happens. But I think it's really cool when people can be like very blatantly honest about that. And like, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Like people think that it is all the time.
Yeah. No, we definitely, my wife and I have always strived in ministry and as a couple and as we've parented our kids, we've like always strived to be very transparent and honest. I think that's a failure sometimes as a ministers. We wanted to make it look like we have a perfect life, right? We want people to think like we put us on a pedestal and we have a perfect life and we don't have a lot of problems and we don't go through issues and we don't struggle and because we're close to God and all this kind of stuff. But no, the answer is every person gets up in the morning and puts their pants on the same way, and every person struggles, and every person has problems. And I'm not ashamed to talk about or say like I struggle sometimes and I've had problems. Like I've lived that joke about the wife that comes in and tells her husband to get ready to go to church. And he's like, no, I don't want to go today. And she's like, well, you got to go. You're the pastor, And he's like, those people don't like me there. I've lived that, that same struggle. And during that season of my life, there were some days when I didn't want to get out of bed, I was depressed. I was just like overworked and just, I'd allowed myself to get into that place. And so, sometimes we get into valleys and it's nothing that we can do. It's not of our creation at all. Sometimes we get into valleys in life and it kind of is our creation. But the good thing is, I think God is faithful, whether we get ourselves into the mess or that's life and it happens. God is still faithful. He's gotten me out of a lot of the messes that I've created in my own life. He's still faithful to help me through those things. So,
yeah. So, believe it or not, you're not the first person that I've talked to on this podcast that was a pastor and kind of talks about this season of burnout. And kind of having to juggle, being married and ministry to your family and, providing and that sort of thing. And so I'd love to dive in a little bit. I didn't dive into it a whole lot on the other episodes, but would love to kind of just ask how you think this hierarchy is supposed to go. Like what you see biblical, like is the call to your family, to bringing other people to the Lord, like where, like how do you, what's the right way and what's the way that like is practiced? Because I feel like this is a really big problem in the church, and like maybe break down like where the problem is for us, if you can.
Yeah. So there's a great verse in the Old Testament, and I don't know if I'm going to mess this up or not, but I think it's Isaac, right? And he had to move his family and his herd. And it said that when he got to the place that he built an altar there and he pitched a tent there and he dug a well, right? He built an altar, he pitched a tent, he dug a well. Remember, he was a farmer, he was a herdsman, he raised cattle. So digging a well was his job. That was part of providing for the cattle, and that's part of his job, right? And that's the thing you put third. He pitched a tent. That's his family. That's the thing you put second. And he built an altar. That was the thing he did first. So God, family, and work. I believe that's biblical based on those verses. He built an altar, he pitched a tent, he dug a well. So And I think as a minister, we can't confuse. Sometimes as a minister, what we do is we confuse that first part, God, with that third part, work. Because if you're a minister, your work is the third. The ministry work, your relationship with God is first. But when we make our work in ministry, when we put that on the first part equal to relationship with God, then that's when we're out of balance, right? It's like ministry can become, or our work has become more important than our family, and even maybe become more important than our relationship with God. And I think that's why you see ministers have moral failures and falls and things like that. And you're like, man, that guy was working hard for the Lord. You know, what happened? It's like, well, yeah, he got it out of whack, though. It has to be relationship with God, and then family, and then work. And whether that's our secular job, or if you're a minister, that's your ministry work. And so if you get that confused, and our ministry work becomes number one, and we kind of mistake that for relationship, that's a problem. And I will say this, because we're talking about like seasons of burnout and stuff like that, because that's close to my heart. There's something that I'm going to be doing there in Shady Valley, Tennessee. I'm going to try to do it twice a year, but I'm calling it a hike-batical. Right. So we want to invite pastors and ministry leaders who are just on burnout. Like they're going through, maybe they've been through a hard season. Maybe their whole staff just left them and everybody's mad and the church is split up and all that kind of stuff. Like, we're going to have it twice a year where we can bring a few pastors in to our bunkhouse. They can go trout fishing. They can hike on the AT. They can hike the Virginia Creeper. They can just sit in the hammock and read if they want to, and come in for 4 or 5 days and just relax. Because what happens with our electronics, like my crazy phone here, or at work with our computers, what used to happen whenever they would just get all messed up, they would tell you, IT would tell you, unplug it and plug it back in. And I think that pastors and ministry leaders sometimes need to unplug and plug back in. People just need to unplug and plug back in. So I'm working on actually going to build another little cabin to use for hike-baticals, so we can bring in pastors, ministry leaders. Sometimes we may bring in a husband and wife couple, depending on what they're going through, where they can just do this hike-batical, which is just come out and recharge and then go back to your congregation.
Yeah. I love that. That is so cool that you guys are doing that. And I think that's exactly, what people need. I think that they need to do it, and then they need to practice the art of doing it continually. Not a one-time thing, but I think that's...
No, it can't be. It can't be a one-time thing. I think it's learning to make sure that you have time to recharge, because sometimes we just get so into our work and we're just wide open. And, I'll ask a pastor, like, when's the last time that you had a sabbatical? And they're like, oh, I've been working here 20 years and I have only missed 3 Sundays in 20 years. And I'm like, well, I know why you're burnt out. You need some time. Yeah. You need some time.
Yeah. So for somebody listening who maybe is going through a season of burnout, or somebody who is struggling, knowing that maybe they're not to the burnout yet, but they're listening and they're like, man, this sounds like me. Like, I have no life with my family anymore. My life has become my job has become a huge part of my life. Like, I'll ask you this. How do you create boundaries, maybe as a pastor? Because I think that's really like where this starts in my mind, is like, you have to create boundaries. But I think you're also in this service industry where you're like, well, it's my job to be there for this whole congregation, and to, have the answers, and to answer the phone at midnight, and to, whatever. Yeah. And so how do you create healthy boundaries while still fulfilling that role?
Yeah, I think you have to be very intentional, right? You have to be very intentional about your schedule, and you have to. I think everyone needs like a hobby or something that refreshes their soul, right? And for me and for us, like, what we enjoy is outdoors things, and I think, of course, I always encourage people to do, find some kind of outdoors pursuit. But for some people, it may be woodworking. For some people, it may be something else. But I think, having a hobby or something just really recharges your batteries, and making sure that you schedule time for that, whatever that is, and being really intentional about your schedule and scheduling time for those things. I think that's really important to me. I think that's the best thing, is to make sure that you schedule those things, and then that you don't let, you protect that time that you have for like recharging and renewal. And I think that if you have something that you really enjoy, where it may be swimming at the beach or whatever, if you're close to the beach, or, then schedule that in and make sure you take time for that recharge every week. Like be intentional about making sure you get that. Some people, it's working out, going to the gym, try to make sure that you schedule that in, and that you are able to do that, whatever it is that kind of refuels and refreshes your soul.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said, making it a priority, and it's not like I'll do this if I have time on Saturday. It's like, no, I need to do this so that I can serve people best in this week. And so it's like, although I may be taking half a day off, I'm going to be able to serve my community better when I do this. And so looking at it from a different lens of like, no, this is going to help me serve better this week, or whatever that looks like. I think, I always put in some bit of my input here on this like practical, piece of advice, but we're going through a book at church right now in our Bible study that's all about church membership. And so we've been talking a lot about like, when you truly are a member of a church and you take that very seriously, and you're not just, a consumer that comes to church and leaves. Doesn't mean that you're necessarily like actively serving, but you're very involved, you're very engaged. Like everybody's problems, like it's a big community, and like it's not just the pastor's role to help out. Like as a church body, like we all have to be playing a part, and we all have to be helping in some way. And so I think we've gotten to this place of like, oh, we come and the pastor does everything, or the church. And it's like, no, as a member of the church, like you have a responsibility as well. And so figuring out what that is to you, but truly like if it's somebody in the church's problem, it's all of our problems, not just the pastor's problem.
Yeah.
And so that's been really helpful for me to look at it a little bit differently, because, I've definitely not felt like I had a huge role in my churches in the past. And it's just like, no, I'm just here and I'm just, a student in the class, you know what I mean? And it's like, no, that's the wrong way to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been a big proponent on like, we've got to get away from this consumer mentality, like you said, like thinking that everything's about us. I mean, really, the church is one organization that exists for its non-members, not specifically for its members. And I think that's one of the failures. That's part of a failure sometimes in churches is members think the church exists for the members. No, it really exists for the non-members, to go and serve the world, to love the world, to bless the world, to show the world Jesus. That's why the church exists. It doesn't exist so that you can listen to the song that you want, or that you can have the air conditioner be the exact temperature you want, or that, you can just sit in the back and be comfortable and live and die, and that's it, So I think we do all have a part to play. I mean, no matter what I tell people all the time that everyone has a calling. It may not be a professional ministry or anything like that, but everyone has a calling and a place to serve and a gift. There's gifts that are given. It doesn't say that the gifts were given to specific individuals. It's the gifts are available for believers, and those gifts are to help to edify the body of Christ and to build up the kingdom of God.
Yeah, so good. Man, well, I just want to say again, thank you so much, Brad, for sharing all of this, and for, just walking us through your journey as a youth pastor to now being a trail chaplain on the AT. I know that this is something I'm just really excited about, and I've loved getting to know you and hearing your story and learning that we lived like 30 minutes away from each other. And I'm like, man, I wish I would have known you when I lived in Alabama. But for those listening who maybe want to follow along with your journey as a trail chaplain on the AT, and if you guys follow along at trail days, they did like worship in the woods, and they did baptisms, and they did all sorts of things. It was so fun to watch in this community that I just feel like, is near and dear to my heart, and I feel like really needs to hear the Lord. So I know I'm super passionate about what you're doing on the AT, and I think it's so needed. And man, I'm just so inspired by you, but would love for you to share just where people can follow along with you and with the nonprofit that you have and just kind of your journey.
Yeah. So, Trail Servants is our nonprofit. So you can follow Trail Servants is on Facebook, Trail Servants is on Instagram. My Instagram is Adventure Preacher. So people can follow that. You can just look my name up, Brad Sasser. But also, we have an app, the Trail Servants app, that you can download, and it's got some discipleship stuff on there. It's got an events tab that shows where we're going to be setting up and doing different things. It's got the Bible app on there, so you can download the Trail Servants app. It can be downloaded through Apple Store or through Google. And I've written 2 books, and so those books are out there. They're on Amazon, and so you can just Google my name, Brad Sasser. What those books are, it's kind of like stories from the trail, and then like spiritual implications from the stories and the things that we went through, in that story. I just saw on my timeline 4 years ago, we were in Pennsylvania, and we just got out of the hospital with my son. He hit his head in Pennsylvania and fractured his skull. And so I tell that story in one of the books, like what God did in those moments and how he brought us through that. And that's the chapter called like God Provides. But yeah, those 2 books, one's called The Road Less Traveled, Life Lessons from a Trail Chaplain, and the other one's called Highways and Hedges. So that's another way someone could follow along with what we do.
Very cool. And we will link all of that in the show notes if anybody wants to check it out. But yeah, just thank you again so much for being here and for sharing with us and just being a guest on this podcast.
Hey, I appreciate you having me and working through my technical difficulties thanks to the Alabama heat today. So,
thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of My Valley, His Victory. If you or someone you know are interested in being on this podcast, please email myvalleyhisvictory@gmail.com.